Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, a really ambitious piece of research. Transition pathway towards 100% renewable energy across the sectors of power, heat, transport, and desalination for the Philippines.
It's quite a title, isn't it?
It is, and we've dug through this detailed study to extract the key insights for you. The stuff that gives you a solid grasp of the Philippines' potential energy future without getting bogged down in all the complex equations.
Exactly. This deep dive is all about making this significant study accessible. And it's comprehensive. It's not just looking at, say, electricity in isolation.
Well, it models a complete overhaul, doesn't it?
It does. For the Philippines from 2015 right through to 2050, covering power, yeah, but also heat, transport, even desalination, all the major energy sectors.
And this isn't some quick estimate. This study uses pretty sophisticated tools.
High temporal and spatial resolution data, for starters.
Right, and a linear optimization model. Now, when you think about the Philippines' thousands of islands, right, going 100% renewable might sound, well, almost impossible.
A huge challenge, definitely.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The central finding of transition pathway towards 100% renewable energy across the sectors of power, heat, transport, and desalination for the Philippines is actually quite surprising.
Go on.
A completely fossil fuel-free energy system is technically achievable by 2050.
Okay, technically possible. But what about the cost? That's usually the kicker.
That's the surprising part. The cost is projected to be comparable to what it was back in 2015
Wow, okay. Comparable cost and fossil-free.
and hitting zero greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, that is a big claim. So how does the study actually build that case? Where do they start?
Well, this study begins by establishing a clear picture of the energy situation back in 2015. That's the baseline, the starting point for all their projections.
Right, you need that baseline. And what stood out from 2015?
Just how dependent the country was on fossil fuels. It was almost 60% of all energy.
60%, so mainly coal, oil, natural gas.
Exactly. And the power sector was the real energy hog, you could say, using up nearly half of the entire primary energy supply.
49%, yeah. That's significant. And the grid itself is complex there, isn't it?
Right. And this study points that out clearly. You can't talk about the Philippine power grid without thinking about its geography. It's an archipelago.
All those islands.
So you've got the main interconnected grids on the bigger islands, Luzon, Mindanao, the Visayas. But then there are all those smaller, more remote islands.
Where connecting to the main grid just isn't practical or economical. The off-grid areas.
Precisely. And the study also gives context on the industry structure back then.
Yeah, the different players involved.
You had generation, transmission, distribution, retail. Kind of the usual breakdown.
With a mix of players, right?
Yeah.
Private companies, state-run entities.
Yeah, independent power producers, the National Power Corporation, or NPC. Transmission was mostly the National Grid Corporation, NGCP.
And then distribution. Mostly electric cooperatives, especially outside the main cities.
Cooperatives and some private utilities, yeah. And in those off-grid areas, the study notes NPC often played a bigger role, often using, well, diesel generators.
Right. The standard for off-grid for a long time, plus some other smaller players too. NPPs and QTPs, they call them.
Exactly. Now, beyond electricity, transition pathway towards 100% renewable energy across the sectors of power, heat, transport, and desalination for the Philippines looks at other big energy users too.
Like transport. That's usually a big one.
It really stood out. Road transport, think jeepneys, buses, trucks. They were the biggest energy consumers in that sector.
Followed by shipping, I imagine, given the islands.
Shipping and aviation, yeah. And we can't forget industry. It's a major part of the Philippine economy.
Around 30% of GDP, wasn't it?
About that, yes. And their energy use is interesting, too. This study notes a lot of it came from burning fuels directly on site, not just electricity from the grid.
Okay, so that sets the scene for 2015. How does this study then connect that to the motivations for this big transition? What were the drivers?
Well, it looks at the official plan at the time, the Philippine Energy Plan for 2016 to 2030.
Which still had a fair bit of fossil fuel in its optimal mix, didn't it?
It did, yes.
Yeah.
Alongside goals for transport efficiency, alternative vehicles, industrial energy saving, but transition pathway towards 100% renewable energy across the sectors of power, heat, transport, and desalination for the Philippines really highlights some compelling reasons why a much more ambitious shift towards 100% renewables makes sense.
Okay, like what? What are the key motivations identified in this study?
One major factor it points to is the high cost of electricity for consumers.
Ah, yes, among the highest in Asia, wasn't it?
It was. That's a big burden. Plus, you still had millions of people, about 2.3 million according to the study, in remote communities with no electricity access at all.
A huge equity issue. And then there's security, right? Energy security,
Absolutely. The study emphasizes the heavy reliance on importing fossil fuels, especially coal.
which makes the country vulnerable to global price swings and, geopolitical stuff.
Totally. And their own main natural gas field, Malampaya, was expected to deplete. So reliance on imports was likely to increase under a business-as-usual scenario.
Okay, so high costs, lack of access, vulnerability, that paints a strong case for change.
It does, and this vulnerability is a key reason why this study proposes this, well, quite bold 100% renewable energy pathway.
And the core of that pathway, technically speaking.
Solar PV, photovoltaics, both for generating electricity and, crucially, combined with battery storage.
Ah, the solar plus storage combo. That really becomes the backbone of their proposed future system then.
Absolutely, that's what the study models as the foundation.
Makes sense for a sunny country. But it's more than just swapping power plants, right? You mentioned other sectors.
Oh, yeah, much more. This study talks about direct and indirect electrification across pretty much everything: power, heat, transport.
Electrify everything, basically.
That seems to be the strategy. And the study projects some huge efficiency improvements from doing that, over 50% by 2050.
How does that work? Just because electric motors are more efficient than combustion engines, for example.
Partly that, yes. Instead of burning fuel directly for heating or vehicles, you're using electricity. And that electricity is generated, ideally, cleanly and efficiently from renewables.
Okay. So for the heat sector, what does that mean in practice, according to study? Less gas boilers.
Exactly. Moving towards things like heat pumps, which are very efficient, direct electrical heating in some cases, and also solar thermal technologies for hot water and space heating.
Right. And transport. We're talking EVs.
Lots of EVs, yes. Direct electrification where possible. But the study also acknowledges that some parts are harder to electrify directly.
Like long-haul shipping or aviation.
Precisely. So for those, the vision includes using synthetic fuels.
Ah, e-fuels.
Huh.
Made using renewable electricity.
That's the idea. So a mix of direct electricity and these synthetic fuels for transport.
Okay, so we understand what a future powered largely by solar and batteries, with most things running on electricity or e-fuels. But what are the main takeaways from transition pathway towards 100% renewable energy across the sectors of power, heat, transport, and desalination for the Philippines? What are the really key findings?
Well, the headline, like we said at the start, is the technical feasibility and the cost.
That it can be done, and it doesn't necessarily break the bank.
Exactly. This study strongly indicates that a 100% fossil-free system by 2050 isn't just a pipe dream, it's technically possible. And the overall costs are projected to be comparable to the energy system costs in 2015.
Which is a huge finding, really. It challenges that whole narrative that going fully renewable is just too expensive, especially for a developing nation.
It really does. And then there are those efficiency gains we touched on.
Over 40% increase in primary energy demand efficiency by 2050.
That's what this study projects. It's massive. It means the Philippines would need significantly less raw energy input to power the whole country.
Which also helps with costs and resource management. But let's circle back to the money. You said comparable cost overall, but the study does mention an increase in total annual energy system costs, right? From about 20 billion euros to 55 billion by 2050.
It does, yes. That sounds like a big jump.
So how does that square with the comparable cost finding?
It's about where the money goes. This study highlights a fundamental shift. Instead of spending billions year after year on importing fuel, coal, oil, gas.
There's volatile operating expenses?
Right. The money shifts towards more upfront investment, capital expenditure in building the renewable energy infrastructure itself. Solar farms, wind turbines, batteries, grid upgrades.
Those shifting from OPEX to CAPEX, essentially.
Largely, yes. And while that total annual figure goes up, reflecting the investment needed, the study projects the levelized cost of energy, the LCOE for electricity, actually goes down.
Okay, so the average cost per kilowatt hour produced over the system's lifetime gets cheaper.
By almost 23% by 2050, according to the study.
That's significant.
Yeah.
What about heat and transport costs?
The levelized cost of heat, LCOH, sees an initial rise, which makes sense as you replace older systems, but then it stabilizes. And in transport, the levelized cost of energy is projected to decline quite a bit, down to around 25 euros per megawatt hour in 2050.
Driven by cheaper renewable electricity for EVs and those synthetic fuels becoming more cost effective.
That seems to be the assumption in the model, yeah.
So more investment up front, but leading to potentially lower, more stable energy prices in the long run. That's the trade-off.
That's the picture the study paints. It's a pretty compelling economic argument alongside the environmental one.
Okay. What about the actual mix of energy sources? How does that change in this 100% renewable scenario?
It's a dramatic transformation, as you'd expect. The study envisions a massive increase in installed renewable capacity,
Dominated by solar.
absolutely dominated by solar PV. It makes up something like 68% of the total capacity needed for power and heat, which the study estimates at around 455 gigawatts by 2050.
455 gigawatts. That's enormous. What happens to the old fossil fuel plants?
Phased out. Coal and oil plants are gone in this scenario, existing natural gas plants. The study suggests they could potentially be repurposed to run on synthetic methane or hydrogen.
Okay. Keeping some existing infrastructure, but running it cleanly. And in heating.
A clear shift towards direct electricity use and those efficient heat pumps we mentioned.
Right. And for transport's energy needs. Still solar driving it?
Very much so. The study projects solar PV capacity, specifically supporting the transport sector, reaching around 325 gigawatts.
Wow. That is a lot of solar panels across the country.
It is, which obviously brings us back to a critical point. Variability. The sun doesn't shine 24/7.
So storage becomes absolutely essential. How does the study handle that?
It emphasizes the vital role of battery storage at all scales, from individual homes and businesses, what they call prosumer storage.
People generating and storing their own power.
Exactly. Right up to large utility-scale battery farms. These are crucial for balancing out solar generation, smoothing the supply for both power and heat sectors.
And the scale of battery output needed.
The study projects it reaching a massive 229 terawatt hours by 2050.
Huge numbers. What about other types of storage? Heat storage.
Yes, that's important too, especially for dealing with seasonal variations in heating demand. The study highlights a growing need for thermal energy storage, TES, and potentially storing renewable gases like hydrogen or synthetic methane.
Storing energy over longer durations than batteries typically handle.
Precisely. And for the transport sector, electricity storage also grows significantly, mainly the batteries in the electric vehicles themselves, reaching about 85 terawatt hours equivalent by 2050.
So the EV fleet itself acts as a distributed storage network.
That's part of the picture. The study also mentions using water electrolysis, splitting water with renewable electricity to make hydrogen, and using hydrogen buffer storage, potentially for making those synthetic fuels.
Okay, so a really diverse mix of storage solutions, short-term batteries, longer-term thermal and gas storage, distributed EV batteries.
It's a comprehensive approach modeled in the study to ensure reliability with all that variable renewable energy.
And the environmental outcome. The zero emissions goal.
The projections are stark. This study shows greenhouse gas emissions dropping from over 130 million tons of CO2 equivalent in the baseline year down to zero by 2050 across all sectors.
Complete decarbonization.
Yeah.
That would align the Philippines strongly with global climate goals.
Absolutely. Puts them in a strong position regarding the Paris Agreement targets.
Beyond the huge climate benefits, does the study point to other advantages for the Philippines from this kind of transition?
It does, yeah. Energy security is a big one.
Moving away from those volatile imported fuels we talked about.
Exactly. By relying on indigenous renewable resources, sunshine, basically, and maybe when the country becomes much less exposed to global markets and price shocks.
More energy independence.
That's the potential.
Yeah.
And there's a socioeconomic angle, too, especially for those remote off-grid areas.
Because renewables like solar can be deployed decentrally.
Right. The study suggests that deploying decentralized renewables could bring significant benefits, finally providing reliable electricity access, potentially creating local jobs, boosting local economies on those islands.
So potentially a cleaner, more secure, more equitable, and maybe even more affordable energy future in the long run.
That's the compelling vision that transition pathway towards 100% renewable energy across the sectors of power, heat, transport, and desalination for the Philippines lays out. It really does paint a powerful picture.
It certainly does. This study clearly demonstrates there's a, well, technically and economically credible path for the Philippines to move towards greater energy independence, slash its emissions, and achieve potentially stable energy costs.
All by really leaning into renewable technologies, particularly that solar PV and battery storage combination.
They really emerge as the heroes of this story, don't they?
They do. Of course, it's crucial to remember, and the study itself acknowledges this.
It's not easy. This isn't flicking a switch.
No. Turning this vision into reality is going to take, well, serious political will, smart government policies, significant investment.
And overcoming some real inertia in the existing energy systems and market structures. They're big hurdles.
Definitely. So while transition pathway towards 100% renewable energy across the sectors of power, heat, transport, and desalination for the Philippines provides this viable pathway on paper.
The actual journey requires careful planning, supportive regulations, and frankly, a lot of money and effort.
Absolutely. Which brings us to a final thought, something for you, our listener, to mull over. Considering the unique island geography of the Philippines and how rapidly the costs of solar and batteries are falling,
Yeah.
how might a really fast, widespread adoption of these decentralized renewable energy solutions, solar panels on every suitable roof, community microgrids, that sort of thing, how might that not just transform the nation's energy landscape, but maybe fundamentally reshape the economic and social fabric of its thousands of islands?
Mm. Moving power generation closer to the people. Quite literally. That is something to think about.
Definitely food for thought. Thanks for taking this deep dive into transition pathway towards 100% renewable energy across the sectors of power, heat, transport, and desalination for the Philippines with us today.